A turning point in the Desert War. The First Battle of El Alamein. The First Battle of El Alamein, fought in July 1942, was a critical confrontation during the Second World War's North African campaign. It marked a turning point in the struggle for control of the Western Desert, pitting the Axis forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, against the British Eighth Army led by General Claude Auchinleck. Although the battle ended in a stalemate, it halted Rommel's advance toward Egypt and the Suez Canal, denying the Axis a significant strategic advantage and setting the stage for the eventual Allied victory in North Africa. By mid-1942, the Axis forces, comprising German and Italian troops, had achieved remarkable successes in the desert, pushing the British forces back across Libya and threatening Egypt. Rommel's primary goal was to seize the Suez Canal, a vital lifeline for British imperial communications and logistics. Capturing the canal would not only disrupt Allied supply lines but also potentially open the Middle East's oil resources to the Axis. With these stakes in mind, Rommel sought to capitalize on his momentum and break through the Allied defenses at El Alamein, a small railway station located about 60 miles west of Alexandria. The geography of El Alamein played a crucial role in shaping the battle. Situated between the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the Qattara Depression to the south, the region created a narrow corridor that limited the scope for large-scale flanking maneuvers, forcing both sides into a head-on confrontation. The British, recognizing this advantage, fortified their positions, constructing minefields, anti-tank defenses, and artillery emplacements. The British Eighth Army faced significant challenges leading up to the battle. Morale was low following a series of defeats, and their equipment was often outmatched by the superior German tanks, including the formidable Panzer IV. However, Auchinleck's leadership proved pivotal in reorganizing and revitalizing the Allied forces. He emphasized defensive preparations and ensured that the British forces would be ready to repel Rommel's anticipated assault. Rommel launched his offensive on July 1, 1942, aiming to break through the British lines with a combination of infantry and armored attacks. Initial engagements saw fierce fighting as Axis forces attempted to exploit weaknesses in the British defences. However, the Allies, bolstered by well-coordinated artillery and air support, managed to hold their ground. The constrained terrain and the extensive use of mines hindered Rommel's ability to deploy his tanks effectively, blunting the momentum of his assault. The battle evolved into a series of attritional engagements over the following weeks, with neither side able to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Rommel's forces, plagued by logistical difficulties and dwindling supplies, struggled to maintain their offensive capabilities. The long supply lines stretching back to Tripoli were vulnerable to Allied air and naval interdiction, further compounding the Axis's challenges. Meanwhile, Auchinleck seized the opportunity to launch counterattacks, exploiting the Axis's stretched resources and inflicting significant losses. The First Battle of El Alamein ended in a stalemate by late July, but its strategic implications were far-reaching. For the Axis, the failure to break through the British defences marked the first major check on Rommel's advance, halting his campaign in North Africa, and denying him access to Egypt and the Suez Canal. For the Allies, the battle was a morale boost, demonstrating that the seemingly invincible Axis forces could be stopped. The aftermath of the battle saw significant changes in Allied leadership. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, dissatisfied with Auchinleck's cautious approach, replaced him with General Bernard Montgomery, who would lead the Eighth Army to a decisive victory in the Second Battle of El Alamein later that year. Montgomery's success in the subsequent campaign was built upon the foundations laid during the First Battle, where the British forces had gained the confidence and experience needed to take the offensive. The First Battle of El Alamein underscored the importance of logistics, terrain, and morale in modern warfare. It demonstrated that the North African campaign was not merely a battle of tanks and troops but also a contest of supply lines, strategic planning, and resilience. By halting Rommel's advance, the Allies preserved their foothold in Egypt, enabling them to regroup, rearm, and ultimately turn the tide of the war in the desert. This battle remains a testament to the resilience and determination of the Allied forces, who, despite facing a formidable opponent, managed to hold the line and prevent a potentially catastrophic Axis victory. The First Battle of El Alamein is remembered not only as a pivotal moment in the North African campaign but also as a demonstration of the critical role that leadership, preparation, and resolve play in the face of adversity. Operation Jubilee. The Dieppe Raid and the Lessons of Failure. The Dieppe raid, conducted on August 19, 1942, was a bold yet ultimately disastrous Allied military operation during the Second World War. It was intended to test German defenses along the French coast, gather intelligence, and provide a morale boost by striking directly at Axis-held territory. The operation involved predominantly Canadian forces, alongside British commandos and smaller contingents from the United States and Free French forces. Despite its ambitious objectives, the raid faced significant setbacks, culminating in heavy casualties and limited strategic gains. Nevertheless, it provided valuable lessons that informed the planning of later operations, including the D-Day invasion of Normandy. The strategic rationale behind the Dieppe raid was multifaceted. Allied leaders sought to assess the feasibility of a large-scale amphibious assault on the heavily fortified French coastline. At the same time, they aimed to disrupt German military operations, secure intelligence about their coastal defenses, and demonstrate Allied resolve to liberate occupied Europe. There was also a desire to placate Soviet demands for a second front to alleviate pressure on the Eastern Front. Dieppe was selected as the target due to its proximity to Britain and the perceived vulnerability of its harbour defences. Codenamed Operation Jubilee, the raid involved an assault force of approximately 6,000 troops, of whom over 4,900 were Canadian. The operation also included air and naval support, with nearly 250 ships and landing craft deployed. The plan called for a pre-dawn assault on several beachheads surrounding Dieppe, with the main objective being the town and its harbour. Secondary objectives included disabling nearby coastal artillery batteries and capturing key intelligence. The raid began with an initial bombardment and landings at designated points along the coastline. However, the operation quickly encountered numerous challenges. Poor timing and coordination resulted in delays and confusion among the assault forces. German defenses, far more formidable than anticipated, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing troops. The element of surprise, crucial to the raid's success, was lost due to engagements with German patrols before the landings. The primary assault on Dieppe's main beach was particularly catastrophic. Canadian forces faced a deadly combination of well-prepared German defenses, including machine gun emplacements, artillery, and obstacles designed to hinder the movement of landing craft. The narrow beach, bordered by steep cliffs, offered little cover, leaving the attackers exposed to relentless enemy fire. Tanks deployed to support the infantry became immobilized on the rocky terrain, further compounding the difficulties. Secondary operations aimed at capturing surrounding objectives also faltered. While some commandos achieved limited successes, such as neutralizing a coastal battery at Varennes-Geville, these gains were insufficient to alter the overall outcome. Air and naval support, although substantial, proved unable to suppress German defenses or prevent reinforcements from arriving. By mid-morning, it became clear that the raid had failed. The decision to withdraw was made, but the retreat was equally costly. German forces, fully alerted, inflicted further casualties on the withdrawing troops. Of the 6,000 men who embarked on the operation, over 3,600 were killed, wounded, or captured. The Canadian contingent bore the brunt of the losses, with more than two-thirds of their forces becoming casualties. The Royal Air Force also suffered significant losses, with nearly 100 aircraft destroyed. Despite its devastating outcome, the Dieppe raid yielded important lessons that influenced subsequent Allied operations. The experience highlighted the need for better intelligence, improved coordination among forces, and more effective use of naval and air power to support amphibious assaults. The difficulties encountered in deploying tanks and overcoming fortified defenses underscored the importance of specialized equipment and thorough planning. The raid also had significant psychological and political repercussions. For Canada, the heavy losses at Dieppe became a somber symbol of sacrifice and a rallying point for continued efforts in the war. The operation demonstrated the bravery and determination of Canadian troops, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. For the broader Allied war effort, Dieppe underscored the complexities and risks of amphibious warfare, reinforcing the need for meticulous preparation. In hindsight, the Dieppe raid remains one of the most controversial operations of the Second World War. Critics argue that it was poorly conceived and inadequately planned, resulting in unnecessary loss of life. Supporters contend that the raid provided invaluable insights that contributed to the success of later campaigns, particularly the Normandy landings in 1944. Regardless of these debates, the raid's legacy endures as a testament to the courage of those who participated in the harsh realities of war. The Dieppe raid serves as a stark reminder of the challenges inherent in military innovation and the heavy costs often associated with learning from failure. It stands as a pivotal moment in the history of the Second World War, one that shaped the strategies and tactics that ultimately led to Allied victory in Europe. Stalemate and sacrifice on the Volga. The Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, lasting from August 23, 1942, to February 2, 1943, stands as one of the most pivotal and harrowing engagements of the Second World War. This battle, fought between the Axis powers led by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, marked a turning point in the war, culminating in a decisive Soviet victory that irrevocably shifted the balance of power on the Eastern Front. Stalingrad became synonymous with both the immense brutality of urban warfare and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. Adolf Hitler's decision to target Stalingrad was driven by both strategic and symbolic considerations. Situated on the western bank of the Volga River, the city was a vital industrial and transportation hub. Its capture would disrupt Soviet supply lines, facilitate further advances into the Caucasus oil fields, and deliver a psychological blow by seizing a city bearing the name of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader. Conversely, Stalin's determination to defend the city at all costs was as much about preserving national pride as maintaining strategic control. The German offensive, part of the broader Operation Barbarossa, began with devastating aerial bombardments by the Luftwaffe, reducing much of the city to rubble. However, this destruction created a labyrinth of ruins that proved advantageous to Soviet defenders. The Germans, advancing under the banner of the Sixth Army commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, initially made significant gains, driving deep into the city. Yet, the nature of urban combat slowed their progress. Fighting devolved into intense, close-quarters engagements as both sides contested every street, building, and basement. The Soviets employed a strategy of attrition, leveraging the city's terrain to nullify the Germans' technological and tactical advantages. Snipers, including the legendary Vasily Zaitsev, played a significant role, turning the ruins into a deadly battlefield for German soldiers. Soviet forces, under the leadership of General Vasily Chukov, adopted the tactic of hugging the enemy, engaging at such close quarters that German artillery and airstrikes risked hitting their own troops. This approach minimized the effectiveness of German firepower and prolonged the battle. As the German advance stalled within Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command prepared a counteroffensive, codenamed Operation Uranus. Launched in November 1942, this operation aimed to encircle the German Sixth Army and its allies by targeting their overextended flanks, which were held by weaker Romanian and Italian units. The plan succeeded spectacularly, trapping approximately 300,000 Axis troops within the city. The encircled Germans, cut off from supplies and reinforcements, faced appalling conditions. Bitterly cold winter temperatures, combined with dwindling food and ammunition, led to catastrophic losses from starvation, disease, and exposure. Hitler's refusal to allow Paulus to retreat or attempt to break out exacerbated the situation. Instead, Hitler ordered the Sixth Army to hold its position, declaring Stalingrad a fortress to be defended at all costs. The Soviet forces, meanwhile, tightened their grip around the city, gradually reducing the German pocket through relentless attacks. By January 1943, the situation for the Axis defenders had become untenable. Paulus, promoted to Field Marshal, a rank no German officer had ever held without fighting to the death, surrendered on February 2, 1943. This marked the first time an entire German army had been annihilated, delivering a severe blow to Hitler's prestige and the Wehrmacht's operational capacity. The human cost of the Battle of Stalingrad was staggering. Soviet casualties, including both military personnel and civilians, exceeded 1 million, while German and Axis losses numbered around 800,000. The destruction of the city was near total, with countless homes, factories, and cultural landmarks reduced to rubble. The psychological impact of the battle was equally profound, as it symbolized the tenacity of Soviet resistance and shattered the myth of German invincibility. Strategically, Stalingrad marked a turning point in the Second World War. The victory halted the German advance into the Soviet Union, and began a series of Soviet offensives that would push the Axis forces steadily westward. The battle also demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated, large-scale counteroffensives and underscored the importance of morale and determination in modern warfare. The legacy of the Battle of Stalingrad endures as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the devastating consequences of total war. The city, now known as Volgograd, serves as a living memorial to the sacrifices made during those harrowing months. Stalingrad remains a symbol of both the horrors of war and the capacity for nations to overcome even the most formidable challenges through unity, determination, and sacrifice. Jungle warfare in the Pacific. The Guadalcanal Campaign. The Guadalcanal Campaign, fought between August 7, 1942, and February 9, 1943, was one of the most significant and brutal campaigns of the Pacific Theater during the Second World War. It marked the first major Allied offensive against the Japanese Empire and played a critical role in halting Japanese expansion and shifting the momentum in favor of the Allies. Centered on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, the campaign combined naval, air, and ground battles, illustrating the complexities and ferocity of modern warfare. Guadalcanal's strategic importance lay in its location, as it threatened vital sea lanes between the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Japan, recognizing this, began constructing an airfield on the island in mid-1942, which would allow them to project air power and potentially isolate Australia. The Allies, aware of the threat, planned an amphibious assault to seize Guadalcanal and neutralize the airfield, codenamed Henderson Field. On August 7, 1942, the U.S. Marines launched the initial assault, surprising the Japanese forces and capturing Henderson Field. This marked the beginning of a grueling campaign characterized by fierce combat, logistical challenges, and fluctuating fortunes. The Marines, though initially successful, faced determined Japanese counterattacks aimed at recapturing the airfield and driving the Allies off the island. The naval battles surrounding Guadalcanal were pivotal. The Battle of Savo Island, occurring shortly after the initial landings, was a disastrous defeat for the Allies, with several cruisers sunk and heavy casualties. However, subsequent engagements, including the Battle of the Eastern Solomons and the naval Battle of Guadalcanal, saw the Allies gradually gain the upper hand. The commitment of carrier forces, the use of radar, and the increasing effectiveness of U.S. naval and air power were instrumental in these victories. On land, the fighting was equally brutal. The dense jungle terrain, oppressive heat, and tropical diseases such as malaria created a hellish environment for both sides. Japanese forces launched multiple offensives to retake Henderson Field, including the Battle of Edson's Ridge and the October Offensive, but were repelled with heavy losses. The resilience of the U.S. Marines and their ability to hold the airfield under relentless pressure became a defining aspect of the campaign. Henderson Field became a crucial asset for the Allies, serving as a base for air operations that supported ground forces and attacked Japanese ships and reinforcements. Control of the airfield allowed the Allies to disrupt Japanese supply lines and maintain their own, despite the challenges posed by the island's isolation and the constant threat of Japanese naval and air attacks. The logistical struggle was a defining feature of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese faced immense difficulties in resupplying their forces due to the effectiveness of Allied naval and air interdictions, while the Allies had to overcome the challenges of sustaining their troops in an undeveloped and hostile environment. The infamous Tokyo Express, the nickname for Japanese nighttime supply runs, epitomized the desperate effort to sustain their forces on Guadalcanal. By late 1942, the tide of the campaign began to turn decisively in favor of the Allies. The Japanese, unable to maintain their positions due to mounting losses and the strain on their resources, began to withdraw. The Battle of Tasafaronga in November, although a tactical success for the Japanese, underscored their inability to sustain prolonged operations. The final evacuation of Japanese forces in February 1943 marked the end of the campaign and a significant victory for the Allies. The Guadalcanal campaign had profound implications for the Pacific War. It marked the first sustained defeat of Japanese forces and demonstrated that the Allies could successfully conduct large-scale amphibious operations. The campaign also highlighted the importance of integrated land, sea, and air operations in modern warfare. For Japan, the loss of Guadalcanal was a strategic disaster that weakened their hold on the Solomon Islands and set the stage for Allied offensives that would eventually drive them back toward their homeland. The human cost of the Guadalcanal campaign was immense, with thousands of lives lost on both sides. The conditions on the island and the intensity of the combat left a lasting impression on those who fought there. For the United States, Guadalcanal became a symbol of determination and sacrifice, while for Japan, it was a stark reminder of the limits of their empire. In the broader context of the Second World War, Guadalcanal marked the beginning of a shift in momentum. It was the first step in a series of Allied offensives that would culminate in the defeat of Japan in 1945. The lessons learned during the campaign shaped subsequent operations, including the island-hopping strategy that defined the later stages of the Pacific War. The Guadalcanal campaign remains a testament to the resilience, courage, and strategic ingenuity of those who fought in one of the most challenging and consequential battles of the Pacific theater. The world's first atomic bomb. The Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was one of the most ambitious and consequential scientific undertakings in history. Conceived during the Second World War, it was a covert effort by the United States, with support from the United Kingdom and Canada, to develop the first atomic bombs. This endeavor not only altered the course of the war but also fundamentally reshaped global geopolitics and the nature of warfare in the 20th century and beyond. The origins of the Manhattan Project stemmed from the growing awareness in the late 1930s and early 1940s of the potential for nuclear energy to produce unprecedented levels of destructive power. Scientists such as Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, alarmed by the possibility of Nazi Germany developing atomic weapons, urged the US government to pursue its own nuclear program. In 1939, Einstein and Szilard wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, emphasizing the urgency of such efforts. This correspondence laid the groundwork for what would later become the Manhattan Project. The project officially began in 1942, under the direction of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, with Brigadier General Leslie Groves appointed as its military leader. Groves played a key role in organizing and overseeing the project, ensuring its secrecy and efficiency. The scientific leadership was entrusted to J. Robert Oppenheimer, a theoretical physicist whose ability to coordinate a diverse team of researchers proved instrumental in the project's success. The Manhattan Project encompassed a vast network of facilities across the United States, with major sites in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. Each location served a specific purpose. Los Alamos was the site of weapons design and assembly, Oak Ridge focused on uranium enrichment, and Hanford produced plutonium. These efforts required unprecedented levels of collaboration among scientists, engineers, and military personnel, as well as significant financial and material resources. The development of atomic bombs involved groundbreaking scientific discoveries and engineering innovations. Two main types of bombs were designed: a uranium-based bomb, codenamed Little Boy, and a plutonium-based bomb, codenamed Fat Man. The uranium bomb utilized a gun-type design, in which two subcritical masses of uranium-235 were brought together to achieve criticality. In contrast, the plutonium bomb employed an implosion method, using explosive lenses to compress a plutonium core into a supercritical state. Despite the project's technical and logistical challenges, it achieved remarkable progress in a relatively short period. By July 16, 1945, the Manhattan Project conducted its first successful test of an atomic bomb, known as the Trinity Test, in the New Mexico desert. The test demonstrated the immense destructive power of nuclear weapons, with a blast yield equivalent to approximately 20 kilotons of TNT. Observers were awed and horrified by the unprecedented energy unleashed by the explosion. The use of atomic bombs in warfare came soon after the Trinity Test. On August 6, 1945, the uranium bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, resulting in widespread devastation and the deaths of approximately 140,000 people by the end of the year. 3 days later, on August 9, the plutonium bomb Fat Man was detonated over Nagasaki, causing similar destruction and killing an estimated 70,000 people. These bombings were pivotal in compelling Japan to surrender, effectively ending the Second World War. While the Manhattan Project was hailed as a technological triumph, it also raised profound ethical and moral questions. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki sparked debates over the necessity and justification of using atomic weapons against civilian populations. Supporters argued that the bombings hastened the end of the war and saved countless lives that would have been lost in a protracted conflict. Critics, however, condemned the enormous human suffering inflicted by the bombings and questioned whether alternative means of achieving surrender were available. The Manhattan Project also had significant geopolitical implications. It ushered in the nuclear age, fundamentally altering the dynamics of international relations and military strategy. The demonstration of nuclear weapons' destructive power spurred an arms race during the Cold War, as nations sought to develop and stockpile their own nuclear arsenals. The legacy of the Manhattan Project is thus intertwined with both the promise of scientific progress and the specter of existential threats posed by nuclear weapons. The secrecy surrounding the Manhattan Project was a hallmark of its operation. Code names, compartmentalization, and stringent security measures ensured that knowledge of the project's true purpose was limited to a select few. Even Vice President Harry S. Truman was unaware of the project until he assumed the presidency following Roosevelt's death in April 1945. This level of secrecy was crucial to preventing Axis powers from learning about and countering the project's objectives. The Manhattan Project's legacy extends beyond its immediate impact on the Second World War. It laid the foundation for the post-war development of nuclear energy and technology, leading to advancements in medicine, energy production, and scientific research. However, it also highlighted the dual-use nature of nuclear technology, capable of both benefiting humanity and causing unparalleled destruction. As a historical milestone, the Manhattan Project represents the convergence of science, technology, and state power on an unprecedented scale. It exemplifies both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of ethical dilemmas associated with wielding such transformative power. The lessons of the Manhattan Project continue to resonate in discussions about the role of science in society, the responsibilities of scientists, and the imperative to prevent the proliferation and use of nuclear weapons in the future. Breaking the Axis in North Africa. Operation Torch. Operation Torch, launched on November 8, 1942, was a critical Allied campaign during the Second World War that marked the first major Anglo-American amphibious assault of the war. The operation targeted French North Africa, specifically Morocco and Algeria, regions under the control of Vichy France. The successful execution of Operation Torch represented a significant step in the Allied effort to reclaim territory from Axis powers, secure vital Mediterranean sea routes, and lay the groundwork for further offensives into Axis-occupied Europe. It was a campaign defined by complex political maneuvering, logistical challenges, and bold military strategy. The decision to launch Operation Torch arose from strategic considerations in 1942, a year when the Axis powers held significant momentum. The Allies faced intense pressure on multiple fronts. The Soviet Union was enduring heavy losses on the Eastern Front, and German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel were advancing in North Africa. The United States and Britain sought to open a new front to alleviate pressure on the Soviets, who were urging the Allies to launch a direct assault on mainland Europe. While an invasion of France was deemed impractical in 1942 due to limited resources, an offensive in North Africa was seen as achievable and strategically advantageous. French North Africa presented a critical target for several reasons. Its ports and airfields were essential for controlling the Mediterranean, and its occupation would allow the Allies to mount further campaigns against Italy and southern Europe. However, the political situation in the region was fraught with uncertainty. The territories were nominally controlled by the Vichy French government, which had collaborated with Nazi Germany but maintained a degree of autonomy. The attitude of Vichy forces in North Africa, whether they would resist or cooperate with the Allies, was a significant concern for planners. Operation Torch was a massive undertaking, involving the coordination of naval, air, and ground forces across multiple nations. The operation was divided into three main landings: Western Task Force at Casablanca, Central Task Force at Oran, and Eastern Task Force at Algiers. It was the first large-scale operation involving US troops alongside British forces, reflecting the growing partnership between the two powers. The landings began on November 8, 1942, under the overall command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. In Casablanca, the Western Task Force, composed primarily of American troops, faced stiff resistance from Vichy French forces. Despite heavy fighting, the Allies secured the port city within a few days. At Oran, the Central Task Force encountered similar resistance but achieved success through a combination of naval bombardments and ground assaults. The Eastern Task Force at Algiers met less resistance, partly due to pre-invasion negotiations with French officials and local resistance groups. The political complexity of Operation Torch was exemplified by the Allies' efforts to secure the cooperation of French forces. The Allies negotiated with Admiral François Darlan, a high-ranking Vichy official who agreed to a ceasefire and instructed French forces to stand down in exchange for recognition of his authority in North Africa. While this arrangement facilitated the campaign's success, it generated controversy among Allied leaders and resistance movements, as Darlan was viewed as a collaborator. Operation Torch also highlighted the logistical challenges of amphibious warfare. Coordinating landings across 3 locations required precise timing and communication, and the Allies had to overcome numerous obstacles, including rough seas, untested equipment, and inexperience among American troops. Despite these difficulties, the operation succeeded in securing all 3 landing sites within days, providing the Allies with a foothold in North Africa. The success of Operation Torch had far-reaching implications. It marked the beginning of the Allied push to drive Axis forces out of North Africa, culminating in the eventual defeat of Rommel's Afrika Korps in May 1943. The operation also demonstrated the effectiveness of Anglo-American cooperation, setting the stage for future campaigns, including the invasion of Sicily and the eventual D-Day landings in Normandy. Operation Torch also had significant political and psychological effects. For the Axis, the loss of North Africa represented a major strategic setback, limiting their ability to project power in the Mediterranean, and exposing southern Europe to Allied invasion. For the Allies, the operation provided a much-needed boost in morale and demonstrated that they could successfully mount large-scale offensives against Axis forces. The campaign underscored the importance of diplomacy and political strategy in warfare. The Allies' ability to negotiate with French officials and leverage local resistance was as critical to the operation's success as its military components. It also highlighted the challenges of balancing military objectives with political considerations, as seen in the controversial dealings with Admiral Darlan. Operation Torch remains a pivotal moment in the history of the Second World War. It marked the first significant step in the Allied liberation of Europe, demonstrating the effectiveness of combined operations and laying the groundwork for future campaigns. It also underscored the importance of unity, strategy, and adaptability in overcoming the complexities of global conflict. As the first large-scale offensive involving U.S. forces in the European theater, Operation Torch symbolized the Allies' commitment to turning the tide of the war and securing victory over the Axis powers. Courage amid despair. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which began on April 19, 1943, stands as one of the most remarkable acts of resistance during the Holocaust. This uprising was a desperate and heroic attempt by the Jewish inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto to resist the Nazis' systematic deportation and extermination efforts. Although it ended in tragic defeat, the uprising became a powerful symbol of courage and the indomitable human spirit in the face of overwhelming oppression. The Warsaw Ghetto, established by the German occupation authorities in late 1940, was a walled-off section of the city where hundreds of thousands of Jews were confined under brutal conditions. Overcrowding, starvation, and disease claimed countless lives even before the Nazis began their mass deportations to the Treblinka extermination camp in the summer of 1942. By the end of that year, the ghetto's population had been reduced from approximately 400,000 to less than 70,000. The survivors, aware of the fate that awaited them, began organizing resistance efforts. The Jewish Fighting Organization, led by Mordecai Onielewicz, and the Jewish Military Union became the primary resistance groups within the ghetto. These groups, despite being poorly equipped and vastly outnumbered, resolved to fight back rather than passively succumb to the Nazi genocide. The uprising was triggered by the Nazis' decision to liquidate the ghetto entirely. On April 19, 1943, German troops entered the ghetto to round up its remaining inhabitants for deportation. They were met with fierce resistance as Jewish fighters, armed with a limited supply of pistols, grenades, and homemade explosives, launched a coordinated attack. The initial German assault was repelled, forcing them to withdraw and regroup. This unexpected defiance shocked the German forces and disrupted their plans. The resistance fighters employed guerrilla tactics, utilizing the ghetto's labyrinthine streets, bunkers, and underground passages to ambush and evade the enemy. Despite their numerical and logistical disadvantages, they inflicted significant casualties on the German forces. The resistance lasted nearly a month, far longer than the Nazis had anticipated, and demonstrated the resolve of the ghetto's inhabitants to fight for their dignity and freedom. The Nazis, determined to crush the uprising, resorted to brutal measures. Under the command of SS General Jürgen Stropp, they systematically destroyed the ghetto, setting buildings ablaze and using heavy artillery to flush out the fighters. Thousands of ghetto residents were killed in the fighting, while others were captured and deported to extermination camps. On May 16, 1943, Stropp declared the uprising over after demolishing the Great Synagogue of Warsaw, a symbolic act meant to signify the end of Jewish resistance. Although the uprising was ultimately suppressed, its impact was profound. It exposed the vulnerability of the Nazi regime to determined resistance, even from those with minimal resources. The courage of the fighters inspired other acts of resistance in ghettos and camps across occupied Europe. Moreover, the uprising shattered the Nazi myth of Jewish passivity, proving that even in the face of near-certain death, people could rise up against oppression. The legacy of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising endures as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and the fight for justice and human dignity. It is commemorated annually in Poland and around the world, serving as a reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust and the importance of resistance against tyranny. The uprising remains a powerful symbol of hope, defiance, and the enduring quest for freedom, in the darkest of times. In the next chapter, we will cover the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, as well as the Allied invasions of Italy and France.